Welcome Internet. Today we're going to be talking about what I personally consider one of the biggest threats to the work of mental health professionals and even the field and the discipline itself. So before we start this video, I need to preface this by saying that this is not the opinion of a guild or even a collectively shared opinion. This is my opinion. Therefore, please take it with a grain of salt, right? It's not a truth. In the same regards, I need to also say that I have only had 10 years of work experience as a clinical psychologist. Therefore, I'm not the oldest and I haven't seen all the evolutions. However, I have seen a certain evolution which I think is not necessarily very positive for our profession as a whole. And thirdly, I need to just specify that this is my understanding of this wider topic. Therefore, it is to take as one bit of the puzzle, but not the puzzle itself. Right? Right. So, this threat that I've been alluding to is the threat of the mental health professional just being considered a technician of the mind. So this might feel strange, but at least in France, where I'm working and where I'm based, there is this push to basically see the mental health professional as merely someone that would provide a certain specific intervention and then would basically cure the patient or at least help the patient manage the symptoms. The therapist not being considered as someone that can open up and think with the patient on life issues, but really just someone that is there to basically have an effect. So you might think that being a technician has always more or less been the case for all of our professions. However, this is not quite true. There used to be a time where it used to be much more introspective. The aim for the result was always there, and I completely agree with that, but it was never the core cardinal principle. The principle was to try and accompany the individual, to give support, to be there, to be a presence with the patient, and to be able to help the patient think through life events, through their own subjectivity, and to understand themselves better. A fundamental core principle of our field. And what I'm seeing nowadays is that more and more what is expected from the clinician is to basically see a mental illness or psychopathology, elaborate treatment, give treatment. And that treatment is very narrow in its definition. For example, right now the government, the French government, is working on how to basically pay back psychotherapies. And it's starting to think, oh well, you use this type of psychotherapy for this type of mental illness. You use this for that, this and that, and this and that. And beyond the fact that the big losers will be humanistic, psychodynamic, and existential psychotherapies, because these therapies are seen as a waste of time or they don't cure mental illness, therefore they shouldn't be paid back by the state. Then of course the therapies that are envisioned are short term, which in of itself is very good. I have nothing against that. However, this idea that it's one or the other seems to me to be wrong. And the more we go on, the more it seems that the psychologist and the psychotherapist in general has to be there to provide one specific treatment, one point in singularity. That subjectivity is not to be explored. What is to be used is basically methods for solving a problem. And the issue with that is that a problem can be vast, wide, and interconnected with so many different levels of existence. That, for example, we can't dissociate the upbringing from the conditions, from basically sociology, from the time period in which we are. And this is what is asked of us, to basically split ourselves between this is psychotherapy, this is treatment, and the rest of human issues. As if basically we were ripping apart a whole discipline to basically just extract the treatment, as if like we were being asked to be like medication, just a molecule that has an action on a very specific narrow symptom, which, when you know how psychotherapy works, it's ludicrous, because it's not that easy. It's not medication. It's not, we are not technicians. It's not, we're not changing the gears of our patients. That's not what it's about. And yet there is this push of authorities and of basically the medical world to try and equate one psychotherapy to a symptom, one psychotherapy to a mental illness, with this underlying aspect that all mental illnesses are basically brain dysfunctions or brain disorders, which is not necessarily wrong, but is it lacks an understanding of what makes us human, what makes us who we are. And this is completely cut to just promote a simplistic idea of mankind, that we would be, our struggles can be reduced to mental disorders, which is wrong. And sometimes we need support not for mental disorders, but for existential questions, for dread, for real deep issues that are at our core, issues that aren't just illness or health. And this ludicrous idea that being healthy is basically just changing the gears, or having gears that can rotate properly in this dysfunctional world, is ludicrous. And yet this is where we're at. The more we go forward, the more there is this, I think, wrong equation of psychotherapy equals the medical domain, i.e. symptom, illness equals treatment. And you can't use another treatment because that's unscientific, that's biased, that's not what we want, that's basically wrong. And why I am against that is because I have seen this clinically, that some patients will go to a certain form of therapy and see themselves evolve through that therapy that is said to be, let's say, for their symptoms. Like, let's say, I don't know, CBT. Again, nothing against CBT, it's great in itself. But here I'm just showing one example. They will try CBT, they will even grow through CBT, as I was saying, but there will be a bottleneck. And it might not help those specific individuals to be able to outgrow their symptoms or to understand them, meaning that the CBT might not be effective. What might be effective for a hypothetic individual is psychodynamic. But if you're directly saying that psychodynamic is not technical enough, is not, let's say, precise enough, is a waste of time, then the patient will never find psychodynamic interventions, meaning that they might stay stuck with their form of suffering. And it can be the inverse, right? It can also be, let's say, if you in an alternative world, you could say the same thing for, let's say someone gets psychodynamic from the get-go, but they needed CBT. I'm not saying it's like one against the other, right? I'm just saying that we need all of them. And we need to have the whole spectrum, because if you're going to say, let's say, trauma can only be, let's say, dealt with through EMDR, first and foremost, it's not accurate and it's not scientific, as we know that plethora of methods can be used. But secondly, what you're doing is, for the people that it's not going to work for, they are going to lose chances in their lives. That technicality is just going to hurt them, because they will never get the treatment that they need and that they deserve. And I think that this is also a great threat for also as professionals, for us to be reduced to just technicians of the mind, of saying the mind works like this, or this is how you cure the mental illness, rather than trying to make us thinkers, not in terms of philosophers per se, but in terms of really trying to take a step back and think both about what the patient is saying, how it intertwines with their lives, with sociology, with contemporary life, and so on and so forth. To really think about what the patient is telling us, and not just to try and apply protocol of treatment to them, to superimpose a protocol onto them. What this also makes us do is that basically we just apply something. We don't think. We stop thinking. And this for me is terrifying, because psychotherapy is not just about technique. It's not just about how to do X, Y, or Z. It's about a much deeper interpersonal approach and a much more introspective. And if we rip that up from psychotherapy, just saying that you just need to psychoeducate patients only, or this is the only thing that really matters, is fundamentally missing the mark and reducing this field that is so important, so interesting, to just a caricature of what it is, or basically of the shadow of what it used to be. And I think that this is a great risk, especially that this approach, this belief, can sometimes be enticing for mental health professionals, thinking, oh, but I'm going to become an expert. I will have the answers. I will know. But this is, at least according to me, my opinion, again, this is a mistake, a deep mistake, because it's not about an expertise. It's about working with the patient to try and help them at maximum. And sometimes you need to adapt. You need to change certain criteria of the therapy to be able to help the patient in the best possible way. And if you're a technician, let's say you don't use other gears of one machine into another type of machine, right? And this is where all of this cracks and breaks down, is that we cannot be technicians. We cannot just be technicians. What we have to be is a wider and more subtle approaches. And I think this is where all of this is so detrimental, is that this nuance, this fundamental understanding of mankind is being lost. And I think that this leads to a form of poverty in our thinking, in our understanding, a poverty that will automatically have repercussions on the patient, because the patient, even if they don't verbalize it, even if they don't know it, are helped by this wider understanding, this whole net of theories, of hypotheses, which we are asked to forsake in order to obey a certain way of dealing with things. And it also, and this is terrible, I think, divides off the field even more. We're already very fractured, regardless of profession, in terms of not every profession is going to have the same aim, goals. There might even be rivalry, and I'll talk about it in another video. But there's also theoretical divides, practice divides, and so on and so forth. And in this already fractured field, you're going to put another fracture, one that's state-focused on what can be useful and what is unuseful. But that fracture, that divide is wrong. It's scientifically wrong. It's basically humanistically wrong. It's wrong on so many levels. And yet, the government is still pursuing it. And here I'm talking about the French government, but I think it's worldwide, that basically there's this false understanding that there are effective scientific protocols to basically treat, and there's this soft, wrong and more easygoing psychodynamic, existential, and so on and so forth methods that like might work but might not, and we are not interested in them. And I think that this is terrible because the more divided we are, the more problematic it becomes for the patient. If we were to all collaborate together, both in technicity and in understanding, then the patient would get the best possible treatment for them. And I mean every individual for them. And we're losing chances for patients if we say that if we are only technicians, then the patient loses so much in this selection that's not even theirs. And lastly, and I will end on this, is that a couple of years ago, the French government basically had a whole report on the training of psychologists, and they were highly critical that we were also trained in part in philosophy. And this criticism was one that stuck with me because I was like, yes, well, obviously, because I mean, these ideas, this suffering hasn't started yesterday. It goes back thousands of years. People have suffered for thousands of years, and this ludicrousness that only like in the last 10 years we've really understood what is going on is mind-boggling. I mean, as Freud said, it's the arrogance of the present, right? I mean, these people have fought these problems, and they might not have come up with the best solutions or even something practical, but they've thought about it, they've investigated it, and it's worth trying to understand it. And this is the whole problem. A technician does not need to think. A technician is there to apply. And this, at least in my opinion, goes against this whole field, because this field is based on thinking. We think with the patient thinks with us. And through our common thinking, there can be re-experiences, there can be processing. And if we're not thinking, then we're just applying. And we're cutting ourselves off from the patient, but also from our humanity. I might be a little, how can I say, poetic in this end of video, but I need you to understand that I think that this is a great threat and one that should be pushed back against. Again, not saying that technicality isn't important. It's important in all fields of psychotherapy. But reducing to just that is an error, that's a mistake, and that's a threat to all of us. And a massive disservice to the patient. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, this is my perspective. If you want to share yours, feel free to do so in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.